The latest employee engagement surveys are showing that people want to be able to bring their whole person to their jobs. And mental health is a key component of this. But I would say that many of us CEOs are not sure how to be supportive. Our guest today, Paula Allen, is a global leader, a senior vice president at TELUS Health, and she leads a team of data scientists, researchers, and experts in organizational health, communication, and behavioral change. And she's here today to share with us what we can do to better support our employees' mental health and why that's good for our businesses. Paula Allen, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start by just talking about what I just said. Why is this such an important topic for leaders?
Well, I think if you look at what's important right now and what separates organizations that thrive and those that languish, it's really not supply chain. It's really not technology. I mean, basically, there's a level playing field in all of those things. It really is their people. You know, if you're in a service sort of industry, it's how people interact with you, the level of problem solving, what they bring to the interaction with their customers, how they actually represent your brand. If you're doing anything that is of a technology nature or manufacturing or anything else, it's really the innovation that people bring to the table, how they work together, how they actually accelerate your business. I don't think that there's been ever a time when the well-being of people hasn't been more important, because that well-being leads to the things that make a difference in an organization.
Such a good point. So let's talk about what you guys do at TELUS. Like what is the tool that you offer that can help CEOs?
Well, there are tools.
Oh, great.
There are many different things that we do because, this is kind of a complex issue and we want to make it easier for people. So at TELUS Health, we have services that support employers in terms of the mental health of their employees, the physical health of their employees, and the financial well-being of employees, because all three make a difference and all three impact each other. So, for example, employee assistance programs, virtual care programs where you can access a medical health practitioner, pension design and savings programs, all of those things. But we also have a 360 view of what's going on in terms of health and well-being. We support physicians, we support pharmacists, we support governments. So we have a really nice rounded picture in terms of what makes a difference. And I've been in this industry over 20 years, and I've been researching over 20 years in one role or another. And I can say one of the main things that people do need to focus on is mental health and well-being, because it impacts everything. It impacts your physical health. It's related to your financial well-being. It's related to your quality of life, your view of your employer, as well as your work productivity. So there's many things, but mental health can never be outside of that mix.
And what is the, so what are some of the behaviors that you think like managers can be bringing into this conversation to help encourage mental health care and just self-care for their employees?
Well, we actually have a mental health index where we get a lot of our information. So I'm going to give you what we found in that, but just to give you a sense of what that index is, I think we've all heard the term or some variation of the term, you cannot improve what you don't measure. And what we found is that it was very difficult for business people to get a measure on what's going on in terms of the mental health and well-being of their people. Like usually you get things from your insurance carrier or a provider that talks about people who are accessing service, but there's many people who don't access service, and every one of us is on some place in this mental well-being continuum. So we developed the mental health index. We started researching it in 2017, launched on a monthly basis in 2020. And we do deep dives. So it's not just what's going on with the population, but what makes a difference. So back to your question.
Yeah.
Manager traits as expressed through certain behaviors makes a huge difference. When managers were team-oriented as opposed to individually focused, so either on themselves or individually focused on each team member, that made a difference. Inclusiveness made a difference as well. And what was interesting about that is that it made a difference not only to separating people who felt excluded versus included, but even those who felt included before, when others were included, when your environment was just generally inclusive, people did better. Everyone did better. Just basically kind. There's still a little bit of that thought around, tough love, that if you give somebody too much recognition, they're going to get lazy, or they're going to get, a big head. That is exactly the opposite of what happens. People are motivated when you support them. People are motivated when you care about them. People are motivated when you're kind, even in very small ways, and people end up disengaging, having their minds become smaller and more anxious when they're in hostile environments. So, I mean, those are completely clear. Those three things are your base. Those are absolutely necessary if you're going to prevent negative consequences in your teams. But there were other things that really made a difference as well that we thought were interesting. So when we looked at the highest performing teams, like the ones where you really saw the cherry on top, if the manager was charismatic, that made a difference. And what that is, behaviorally, is that they actually really cared about what they were doing. They had an energy about them, and they had a belief that things were going to go in a positive direction. That made a difference and showed itself in charisma. And also, when managers were confident in making decisions, that also helped their teams. It helped them feel grounded. It helped them feel safe. It helped them respect their managers more. So, the three basic things that I mentioned, but those two additional things really accelerated people's ability to be their best.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. I've been in some very toxic work environments, which was really one of my motivators for opening up my business, even was just really this deep desire to end suffering in the workplace and to help people feel that way. And I still fight up against some of those leaders that will say things like, well, those people should be happy they have a job. And, why won't they just do what I tell them to do? I'm giving them a paycheck. And I just look at that and I feel like it's like people saying, like, I'm going to do my work by candlelight, and I'm going to send my snail mail. Like, nobody does that anymore, right? We have electricity and we have computers. This is the new revolution, I think, is a kindness in the workplace, the bringing the whole person in the workplace. And it sounds like that's what you're seeing as well.
Yeah, and we have the data to back it up. So this isn't just, me saying, be kind because I want people to be kind. Like, this is me saying that these are important things for business leaders to understand, because they will make a difference in your business. And just to your point around, people should be happy that they have a job. Let's sort of break that down a little bit. In our data, there are people who are just working for cash, like that's it. That's not the majority, by the way. The majority are also really are working because they want personal growth. They want interesting work. They want recognition. They want that kind of social environment. There's many motivators to work. And when people don't have any of that, either because they're not getting any of that, or their history has sort of shaped their mind that it's not possible, their mental health is worse. Their ability to sort of, do that extra discretionary effort is worse. And the other thing is, being an employee is different than, how do I put this? We have two different sort of work populations. We have employees, and then we have gig workers. And we find that there's a place and a time for gig workers, but there's no two ways about it. Your gig workers are not going to accelerate your business. It is those little things in between that people do that kind of reflects discretionary effort that helps your business move forward. So if you treat people, even employees, as if you just do this task and I'm just going to take care of you in terms of your money, I'm not going to care about your well-being. I'm not going to care about you as a human being. I don't even see you as a human being. You you are stingy with your relationship with your employees, you are not going to get that extra benefit of having an employee as opposed to somebody who's just in and out.
For sure. It kind of made me think a little bit about that sort of like ungigging the workforce idea, right? That this, or even unindustrializing the workforce, and that we've been putting people in work that is reflective of an assembly line. And it's really not that going to work that way anymore. And so I want to touch on the mental health then of the managers. That a minute ago when you mentioned the charismatic leader and the leader that is kind and has that enthusiasm, I mean, that requires them to also have a really strong mental health themselves.
Yes.
Is there anything specific you'd recommend to leaders to keep their mental health up to be that leader that people need?
Yeah, it's a super important point because sometimes we forget about it. We put a lot of, burden on leaders and forget the burden that they're under as well. I think that the number one thing is that we have to be, realistic in terms of, some of the challenges that leaders have. We actually did a major study looking at the mental health and resilience of senior leaders. So this was, typically, one level below a CEO and a large organization. And we found it was very strained. And we found that they thought that the rules were different for them, that even if they wanted to support their people, they felt isolated and that they didn't feel that, there was really that latitude for self-support. So that is, forgive me for saying that, that is one of the most ridiculous aspects of our society. The fact that because you have a certain title and a certain role that you can't be human. I think a lot of us and a lot of leaders believe that grit and just being able to push through and the ability that we've always been high performers and been able to problem solve and get through things means that we are going to be mentally resilient. It's not so. It's absolutely not so. What happens is when you have somebody who has that kind of mindset, I'll just push through. I have grit. I've always been able to push through. I'm not going to take care of myself. I'm not going to pay attention to signs. All of these things, you end up crashing. And the way it ends up happening is, typically, you begin to use your quote unquote superpower. Like if you're a perfectionist, you become very nitpicky. If you are a good critical thinker, you become very critical of other people. That it shows up with you actually creating a negative environment for people around you. The other thing that happens is that, if you're tending to want to have this kind of, push through anything approach, you might not do the work needed in order to build your resilience so you can get through difficult times in a healthy way. You gravitate towards quick fixes. So you're more likely to use alcohol or non-prescription medication or prescription medication, which is another risk. The other thing that happens is, people get to the point where they're able to do everything. Other things in their life might not be going so well, but they burn out and then they leave, which isn't helpful to anyone. So all that to say, I think it is important that, if your organization has an employee assistance program, it's not just for your employees, it is for you. Every single one of us needs to have other people to lean on. And what we found in our research is when leaders lean on other leaders, that wrapped around the world twice in terms of its benefit. So having a peer support group within your organization or across your organization, people who, and it's not a peer support group and necessarily I'm going and I'm pouring out my emotions. It's just having people you can talk to about a business challenge, about anything, about, something to distract you. All of that is super, super important. So that self-care is the starting point. Over and above that, we have found so much benefit to leaders when they are actually taught and trained on how to deal with certain issues with their employees. Like most leaders want to be good managers, have the traits that I had mentioned before and those behaviors, but who teaches you that? Well, it's all teachable. If you see an employee in distress, how do you deal with that employee in distress in an appropriate way? All of that is teachable. So when we have those skills built into the manager profile and support, then manager stress goes down as well.
For sure. I totally agree with you on that. We've trained like over 2,500 managers with our management training program that we have that's geared toward small business leaders. And I mean, of all these people we've taught, like the feedback over and over is, I didn't realize I could learn this.
Yes.
But it ties back to the neuroplasticity of our brains, right? That we can grow and we can change. So I want to circle back around to this idea of inclusiveness, or not idea, what you mentioned earlier about inclusiveness, because I think there's another byproduct of this that business leaders need to know, which is that when you create an environment where people belong and they feel like they belong, innovation happens.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you've done a lot of work on innovation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that is most illuminative is when you actually think about children. And what creates a healthy environment for a child? Because when you think about it, as adults, we're just large, slightly wrinkly children. I mean, they're just human beings in a kind of a grown-up form, or a child form. And it's so important for children to thrive. And I think we all know this, to have this sense of belonging. So you could have a very bright child, for example, and they're in school and they're acing, but that doesn't get maintained if they don't feel a part of a group, if they feel isolated. It ends up, it is such a basic human need to feel part of a tribe, a community, a family, a group, that sense of belonging. If we don't have it, it actually impacts our brain. It creates an anxiety because it creates a threat. So think about, several hundred years ago, before we had food delivery and all the things that we have that'll allow us to be pretty isolated. If you were by yourself, you probably didn't survive. You probably died. You wouldn't have a community to sort of help you survive because the environment was so difficult. Well, we haven't really grown out of that. Like when we are feeling not a part of something, that kind of anxiety, that kind of fear, that kind of response naturally comes up and shuts down our higher level executive functioning. So your ability to be creative, your ability to be innovative is compromised. So that's a long way of saying that, think about how we're built as human beings and what helps us survive and what helps us thrive. And then, belonging is definitely a part of it. And that's what leads to innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an overlooked thing. And I think when we have a leader who is doing that, being that more toxic and creating that toxic environment, thinking that that's going to drive better behavior, that it's not. And I think the research is showing that, and what you just said is another perfect example of that. So, what do you feel are some small things right now that our listeners could do to improve their own mental health or improve the mental health of their employees? What would be some sort of final advice that you could have for our leaders, for our listeners?
Well, I'll start with people improving their own mental health, because I don't want this just to be a conversation about someone else. As we talked about before, you're not going to be in a good place to support anybody else. As a matter of fact, you might create damage if you're not in a great place. So, in the beginning, think about what we need as human beings. So just going back to the point around needing a sense of belonging, what's been happening over the past couple of decades actually is that we've become more isolated as a society. Our worlds are becoming a little bit more disconnected from other people. And even the Surgeon General has come up with twice. Surgeon General has come up with papers and warnings saying that this is a huge health issue. So I do think that we need to make sure that we reach out to others. We have other people in our lives that, you actually even have to plan that social connection. We know that stress goes down when you are amongst others. We talked about, managers and leaders having peer groups. Do not underestimate that. And even as a result of the pandemic, 2/3 of us are having less social contact that we did before, and that is negatively impacting us. The next level of that is when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed, then, your social circle might not be enough. It might, but sometimes it's not. And in that case, you have to reach out and get some additional support, perhaps from a professional. So, an employee assistance program, for example, and many small employers don't necessarily understand how cost effective it is to have an employee assistance program, that there might be even one available through your insurance provider that you don't even know about. But having that platform of support where, you might only need to have one conversation, especially if you contact that person early. And it helps you put things in perspective, helps you not feel alone in your feeling of being overwhelmed. And the earlier and sooner that you do that, the less likely that you will have complications and more difficulty and need more support. So that's definitely one thing, but generally taking care of your physical health is important as well. Your emotions are controlled by your brain. And if you're not taking care of your nutrition, your brain is not going to be able to withstand strain. Also just having a variety of experiences is important. We talk about burnout as, you're overworked, but really what it is you've got too little variety. You need different experiences in your life, a little bit of fun, a little bit of change of scenery, a little bit of creativity, all of those things. So take care of yourself, number one. And in terms of taking care of others, being a good support, just think about those things that I mentioned before. Just being kind, being empathetic, making sure that people don't feel excluded and you have that sense of belonging, helping people. And this is sort of tied to that feeling of being included, a team orientation, like it's us who's going to do X. That gives people motivation as well. And when you see someone struggling, don't turn a blind eye. Mm-hmm. You don't have to pretend to be a counselor. You sure as heck don't have to be able to fix their problems. But if you don't do anything, then it leaves that person more isolated. If you see a change in behavior, just say, I've noticed that you're coming into work a little bit later. I've noticed that you're isolating yourself a little bit more. I care about you. I'm concerned. Is there anything I can do to help? That alone wraps around the world twice in having people feel seen and cared about.
I think that's a perfect spot to end. So, Paula, thank you so much. This has been very insightful. And I think I'm excited to help bring the message out a little bit more around what you're doing to the world. It sounds wonderful. I think a lot of businesses could be using it. So thank you so much for your time today on How I Turned the Corner.
Pleasure.